Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, brothers and sisters, today is a very special evening. We're doing something special here on Believe Radio Fresno, and that is in honor of Black History Month. We are going to be having a very impactful and powerful discussion with a very capable and qualified young man. I am acquainted with I've known him all his life. I can really say that I've known him all his life. But he is my friend and brother, and that is in the personage of Dr. Jeffrey Hunt. Listen, those who are going to come in, please like and share this on your social media platforms. It's going to be a very informative discussion, something that I think will be cathartic for some of you to start having these kinds of conversations with your children, your nieces, and your nephews, because we have to be strategic and intentional in how we move forward as a people group in the next coming seasons and decades. All right. Welcome, Dr. Jeffrey Hunt, to Believe Radio Fresno and to this special Black History Month edition. How are you, sir?
It is great to be here. I'm doing wonderful, sir. How are you?
I'm good, man. It's been a busy Sunday, and it's we had some issues with our heater here in LA, so we had to purchase a new one, which put us out of our building. So we
Wow.
were having 2 o'clock services, so it kind of threw my timetable off a little bit.
Uh,
But this afternoon was our last 2 o'clock service, so I'm good, man, and I'm ready to dive in to this discussion. I think it's such a very crucial and critical conversation as it relates to the state of education. And like I said, you're on the ground, hands on involved, dealing with multiple ethnic groups, but just kind of wanted to pick your brain, so to speak, just to
yeah.
kind of so parents and others will have an idea. Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, what it is that you do in the community and in the field of education.
So I am an educational leader here in the Fresno area. Been at it for almost 25 years.
Wow, man.
Yeah, time flies. And so, yeah, just, local Fresno, born and raised and educated for the most part here through Edison High School in Fresno State. And then did a doctorate at University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Just extended, and just a lifelong learner, committed to uh, improving myself and improving my craft. For as many days as I have, trying to learn something new every day.
Right. Dr. Hunt, go back to you made an inference there about your local training. Speak to the importance of those who stayed home and did their schooling. Talk about the importance of that and how that has value.
Well, I feel like it has. I've got several friends that went off for school, and there's a value in that too. But I feel like being home, you're able to, as you're learning, just really be an ethnographer of the community. So as
Mm,
you're learning new stuff, you're in the thick of it, and just immediately able to apply stuff. So a lot of the things I learned going through Fresno State, while going through Fresno State, I was working in Fresno area schools,
mhm.
and so I was able to, my impact on my community was not like something I had to wait until after I graduated to do. I was able to, day in, day out, just continually impact my community as I was learning new stuff.
And to that point, and I've watched your life, of course, because we're family and everything growing up. I think the other piece that speaks to is there was no disparity in the quality of education because you stayed home, right? And you still were able to have your finger on the pulse of what's really going on in that area and community. You know what I mean? So I think that's to me, you stayed, and there's something that can be said for when you stayed. David said to the men at Ziklag, don't discount those who are staying behind, even though we have to go to Ziklag and fight for our families. They're just as important, and they're going to receive and get the same blessings. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I was one of those. I went to Fresno Pacific, but I was angry at my dad because I wanted to go somewhere else. He
Yeah.
kept saying, "Stay home, stay home." There were reasons why he said, that because economics, we couldn't afford other
Mhm.
stuff at that time. But anyways, the point is, you, watching you and watching how you have been a great custodian, right,
Mhm.
of what God has entrusted you with, both secular and sacred. You really do bring value to what it is to be local, and I say that to honor you and salute you, that you've been very loyal, and making sure that Fresno and the community and its voice is heard.
I appreciate that, and we were fortunate. We were blessed to have a research university here in Fresno, so that opportunity was given to me. Given to me to get a high quality education here in Fresno. So I appreciate that.
Because that's good. Because some people think you got to go away to really get a high level, intense course experience, and you don't.
No,
I guess that's the point. You don't. You can stay right here, and the world comes to you.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the first question up is the state of education. In your view, are we still fighting the eel of segregation, or how do you explain that module? Is that something that is still discussed amongst your ranks? Kind of tell us where we are there.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one, if you don't have your fingers on the pulse of education, you would have thought that, with the Supreme Court ruling in Brown versus Board of Education, to the ruling to desegregate schools and all of these things, you would have thought that schools would have been like desegregated and super diverse. But one thing about, and I tell people this, when you think about systemic racism and systemic oppression, these things are called systemic for a reason.
That's
Um,
good, sir.
and
That's good,
so
sir.
when these systems are put in place, the founders and the folks who put these systems in place, they weren't ignorant folks, right? The idea of racism is ignorant, but you're talking anthropologists, you're talking physicians, you're talking
Mhm.
lawyers, and so these systems that were put in place were meant to transcend were meant to stand the test of time.
Mhm.
And so you had these, all the way back from the abolition of slavery. Like you had these systems that were put in place because somebody knew that slavery was going to be abolished. So that was to trigger the next aspect
Mhm.
of the system, right?
Mhm.
Jim Crow.
Mhm.
Somebody knew that Jim Crow was going to be, outdated and ruled, illegal. So you had the trigger put in place for the next round. So these ideas of, so when you think about systemic racism and systemic oppression, these systems are meant to stand the test of time. And I think what we've been working on is trying to chip away at these systems.
Mhm.
But as we do that, there are triggers built into these systems. So getting to the state of education now, housing policies in the last 20 years
Mhm.
were a trigger
Mhm.
to continue these systems. So you have schools that a lot of studies are finding. You have schools now that are more segregated than they were in 1954 when Brown
Mm.
Board of
Because
Education.
it's the economics piece, right?
It's economic, yeah. It's racial segregation and it's economic and socioeconomic segregation, and so for instance, you have when schools that are predominantly Black and Latino are more likely to be underfunded, more likely to have fewer a lower ratio of credentialed teachers or properly credentialed teachers, more likely to be under resourced, more like right. So these systems these were again the trigger. The systems had triggers, and so
Mhm.
I feel like the latest trigger was probably 25 years ago or so when you had these housing policies. I mean, you could go back to redlining and things like that
Right.
here in the Fresno area, right?
Right. Right. Because it did exist.
Fresno was a poster child for
Red
um,
line.
redlining
Yeah.
and housing discriminatory lending practices, and so you have houses here there are communities in Fresno, and granted they're illegal to be executed, but there are houses in Fresno that have racial covenants on the deeds.
Mhm.
But again, and so Fresno is the poster child, is one of the poster children for these systems of segregation and these systems of racial and economic segregation.
Dr. Hunt, let me ask you this. With that being said, because wow, I just thought about three questions I could ask you, and no, it's powerful. But the first one that I'll address is how does that trickle down to the approach and the strategy of educating and teaching our children? I guess let me say to be more streamlined, because no one can control the mood, attitude, and behavior of a teacher.
Right.
But being the fact that you are an educator, and you know a very accurately the level of stress and things that they deal with. What kind of pressure does that put on a teacher when they're in an area where they're having to deal with children from a low socioeconomic background? Is there a pressure? Do they even recognize it's a pressure?
Mhm.
How do they respond to that?
So there is definitely an innate level of stress when you're working in an resource and under resourced school and an under resourced community. For one, you don't have the community support
Mm,
that it's little things like um, sponsorships and little things like partnerships with community. This is work that is currently being done in some of our or being it's work that people are pursuing in some of our underserved schools, and a community schools models and things like that. But historically, you didn't have, as a teacher, speaking for myself as a teacher in an under-resourced community, um, you didn't have training in dealing with trauma
mm,
and kids dealing with the issues of the trauma associated with neighborhood violence and the trauma
mm,
associated with drug abuse in the home, and so you were given this reading curriculum and this math curriculum, right, and this science curriculum, but you weren't given the tools to fully meet the needs of the kids that were sitting in front of you. And so what that led to was a lot of teacher burnout, a
mhm,
lot of, and like some of the stats that I just shared, where you've got some of these schools where the ratio of properly credentialed teachers is low, because it's draining work, working in communities where there is high crime, where there is trauma, where there are all these dynamics that make it difficult, where you have these layers of things that you have to do as a teacher to effectively educate uh, the children in your schools. And so it's draining work, and so you have this exodus of teachers who, once they can find a position where they don't, in a community, they don't have these dynamics, there's a temptation. I mean, there are some that love that work, right? But there's temptation to like move out of those communities, just where you feel like you can go do what you were trained to do, and deliver curriculum.
two strategic words that you mentioned for a takeaway: partnership and
Mhm,
community.
mhm,
Partnership and community. It is Believe Radio's desire, motive, mantra, passion to make sure that we are a community partner. One of the reasons why I strategically wanted to have you as my guest was so that that platform could be vocalized, that we are here to embrace and support education and anything that's going to wholesomely build our cities and communities. And so, those of you who are going to watch this, watching this now, please make sure that you um, do your best in trying to lend a hand, volunteer, partner with, and support, because it is a village. It does take a village to really raise and educate our young people. Don't be a silo to yourself. All right. God has given you what you have so that you can be a blessing. All right. That was the first question. The second part to that is um, growing up in West Fresno and then being able to matriculate and advance in life and move out. Did you notice anything in that paradigm shift for you? Was there noticeable differences when you moved around to different zip codes or areas of the city? Talk
Uh,
about.
yeah, so there were definitely I mean there were but grew up in West Fresno, educated in West Fresno, had a just had a phenomenal collection of teachers,
Mhm,
at Carver Elementary and at Edison Computech and Edison High School, and just hardworking teachers, dedicated teachers. And I kind of, looking back in elementary school, and when I talk about this teacher fatigue, I mean, I had teachers in I was blessed to have teachers of color at
mhm.
Carver,
Wow.
and I had teachers who were like, aunties. Like there were teachers who, I had, first grade. I had a teacher, Miss Campbell. When every other teacher left the campus at 3:15, she was there till 5:30 or 6, so that you could go home and eat and come back and read to her
Wow.
if she was like, wanting her kids to learn how to read. And so I was just blessed to have, these kinds of teachers. And you mentioned community partners. So back in the day, the community partners were the retired mailman that lived on the next street that allowed us as kids to go into his den and use his encyclopedia to do research,
Mhm,
right? Like he was a community partner
mhm.
as
Right.
when it comes to my education, because the school libraries were closed after school. But he like had encyclopedias, and he allowed us as kids to come into his den. Didn't have to open his home up to us. But so these were your community partners. Second Baptist Church over in West Fresno.
Yeah, Mary Curry. She
Yeah,
was involved in my life. Yeah.
they were community.
Yeah.
These were your community partners,
Yeah.
and some, and I'll speak to it, prophet. I'll speak to the church um, as getting past that stigma that there's this church and state separation.
Right.
um,
Right.
Churches are viable community. Churches are necessary community partners, because churches represent the community, especially your inner city churches. There are some commuter churches, but these inner city churches, like
That's good.
schools, should be connecting with these churches in our rural communities, because that's where your kids go, and that's where your families go, and that's where their values are extrapolated
Mhm.
from these churches. So why not, as a school, immerse yourself in that partnership,
That's good.
and that's old school community schools, right? Like
Yeah.
Mr. Anderson on the next block from me,
Right.
Miss Perry, Miss. And I just like you said,
And
Miss
our pastors,
um,
my
pastor,
father, your
yes,
father. I
my
mean,
past,
these men,
yes,
yeah.
absolute. So that's old school community schools, right? Where community members, it's almost like modern day schools have put fences up, to and then there are people who want to help schools and don't know how. So
Mm.
schools, school officials, like, reach out, be outside of your fence, and help, let people know how they can help, because people want
That's
to help.
good.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Hunt, it was this morning I was getting ready for church, and this thought came to me. Sometimes in how we approach things, there's this air of judgment, right?
Mhm.
And one of the reasons why I'm so glad that the conversation is positive, cathartic, is you don't have to tear down something in order to change something,
Right.
right? Like in other words, if you focus on being the best version of yourself, right? And you present that to the world, and in the area of life you have been given influence. If you focus on making that important, your life will bear the fruit that would bring influence and conviction and change. And I appreciate your approach because, especially with Brown versus the Board of Education,
Uh-huh.
it's so easy to go left or go negative with segregation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because every black person has something to say about what we think in our mind is fair or unfair treatment,
Yeah.
you know. But your approach is not only is it positive and constructive, it is something that this morning I preached a message. I refuse to be bitter. I'm going
Mhm.
to be better, right? It's like
Yeah.
you always have a choice in how you respond to a situation, but being better about it, I believe, will have a greater lasting impact than being bitter. Am I making sense?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I appreciate your approach because the first question, um, you really set the tone for this conversation because your approach was very, very constructive, and that is something. Hear me, people. That is something that I want y'all to hear. That black men are not ignorant, violent. You know, everybody doesn't suffer from anger management issues or high levels of dysfunction. Now, I'm not saying we're not dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Okay, but some of us, you know, can
Mhm.
articulate our comments and our thoughts in a way that can be productive. So please, let's start to change this narrative, this negative narrative that we're seeing blasted and posted around social media.
And I would even just take it one step further and help us realize that even those who may not be articulate, if you are intent on listening,
Mm,
you can hear them communicate their heart, right? That their English, their American English may not be. I mean, I have my theories about English as a language in general, but the American English, traditional English may not be that great. Grammar conventions may not be that great, and they might be a little emotional. But if you're intent on listening, and I kind of have notes to speak to that later on when you're talking about meeting the needs and educating
mhm,
Black children. If you're intent on listening and learning
mhm,
about and learning from kids, a kid can talk to you in Spanish and you not know a lick of Spanish, but if you're intent on hearing that kid, you can hear that kid's heart through that language barrier.
mm.
So we
So I
gotta
can call you a language whisperer then?
no, because people speak from their heart,
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
and they'll use gestures, they'll use whatever. If they know you're listening and that you care enough to listen to them, they'll use whatever mechanisms they have to communicate their heart to you. And so it's I would just, say just, to not be, for people not to be dismissive of someone who doesn't talk like you, someone who doesn't,
Mhm.
articulate,
That's good.
their words like you. It's like, they're speaking their heart just if you listen, right? If you can sift through, the filters of
Mhm,
grammar and language, you can hear the heart, sift through the emotion, right? And hear somebody's heart. And then that'll position you to more effectively reach them and more effectively serve them. As we all are, as ministers, as teachers, as community service, we're here to serve, right? Like, so how do I position myself to be a more effective servant?
mhm,
And how can I serve you properly if I don't know your heart, if I don't know your needs, if I don't know your desires? So I have to get over myself and
That's
my
good.
predispositions to
Mhm.
hear your heart through the anger, through the frustration, through the language, right? Like, so pardon my tangent, but I just like
No,
needed
no,
to,
no. It's good. It's good. I want to kind of get through some of these because I
yeah,
know
yeah.
you being a preacher and me being a preacher. Listen, we can take one theme and
Right,
go
right.
on.
Yeah, I'm trying to be cognizant of time as
Okay,
well.
so let me go through these. Um, we are 60 years
Mhm,
removed
mhm,
from Dr. King's "I Have a Dream"
mhm.
speech. Um, where do you think if how would you surmise? How would you label where we are in the state of education as people of color 60 years after his dream and hope for a better world for us?
So I mean, first, I think we have to acknowledge as people of faith that Dr. King was one of the most skilled prophets
Hmm.
of I won't say of my generation, but he was one of the most skilled prophets on record, right?
Hmm.
And he was divinely inspired to speak to systems and to speak
Hmm.
particularly to American
Yeah.
systems and so, above and beyond his "I Have a Dream" speech, he spoke to education systems,
Mhm.
right? So he spoke to the power of education being, no, he spoke to the need of education being a twofold to like to speak to and to address intelligence and
Mm.
to and to address character.
Oh,
Um,
good.
we have SEL, social emotional learning in schools nowadays. Dr. King was speaking to the need for social emotional learning, 60 years ago, 70 years ago.
Mhm.
Like he was speaking to the needs of schools, um, addressing character and teaching high character because again, how do you bust up this systemic oppression if you can't get to the hearts of kids
Mhm.
who are the propagators of
Mhm.
these systems of oppression? So
Mhm.
and so he was speaking to, how do we begin to infuse character as well as building, academic aptitude and reading and writing and critical thinking and mathematics, but how do you leverage schooling to infuse character into this next generation of adults who are the kids in our schools. And so he was, he was ahead of his time. Like I said, I mean, and that's the definition of prophecy in general, right? Like he was ahead of his time and speaking to these systems and giving us strategies to really dismantle systemic racism and systemic oppression. And that's why things like critical thinking have been fought. Like, I have I have two grown kids now, and I have a daughter who is 19, and when she was in high school, I encouraged her to challenge what she was being taught. Don't take what you're being taught at face value because that's how oppression, that's how bigotry, that's how
Mhm.
sexism, that's how these things are fueled or through through these systems. I told her push back, ask questions, and you can do that in a respectful way.
Yeah.
But I feel like in a lot of instances, kids, especially, and here I'll go back to my education. We were taught compliance. We were taught sit in a row,
Right.
do what you're told, don't talk unless you were talked to,
But
asked to.
that was also the culture of society, right?
Yes.
So that's why it influenced the schools.
Well, and then there was corporal punishment. So while we, so Fresno, right? So while we were being in West Fresno being taught follow the rules, don't speak unless you're asked to speak, sit in your row. there were kids in North Fresno being taught challenge what,
Right.
by their parents sometimes, because that's even our parents were like, make sure you obey your teacher, make sure,
Yeah.
comply, right? In North Fresno, they were taught challenge the systems. If something doesn't feel right, push back, right?
Okay. So again, I mean, to your point, it's systemic racism because North Fresno, different zip codes,
Different zip
different
codes.
socioeconomic
Yes.
status, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, and I saw it too when I was coming up. You're absolutely
Mhm.
right. The more north and east you went, there seemed to be more liberties. There
Yeah.
seemed to be more freedoms,
Yeah.
right? Even as it relates to education and choices. I
Mhm.
remember, I always had a mouth right. So one of my grade school teachers, her name was Mrs. Kamamoto. She was a Japanese lady who always got me. I mean, she was like on me like white on rice, right? She knew my dad was a preacher, and so I'd always get in trouble because she's like John. She would like, Fremont Elementary was set up like an octagon, right? So
Uh-huh.
she would yell, "Jonathan, shut up!" or "Jonathan, sit down." Because I was that kid that asked questions. I did
Yeah.
it respectfully.
Yeah.
Now, I will admit, I think I could have gone further, but of course, my parents were of that generation that said, "Do as you're told, sit down,
Yeah.
be quiet."
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think had I had a little more encouragement, I probably would have went to law school and became a lawyer or something, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I went and sat down and shut up like I was told
Right.
until I became of age.
And it like and for me, I learned how to navigate that system, right? And not till I got into my later years is when I was taught, oh, you can challenge these systems, right? You can think outside the box. But that wasn't my K6 experience in West Fresno. Like, don't think outside the box. This is, you know,
Right.
we're gonna get you, educate you, learn how to sit in a row, learn how to follow instructions,
Ooh.
learn how to do this so you can go be a wonderful employee for
That
some.
was systemic racism, though, right? Like, if we really break it down,
Yes.
what you just said is powerful, man.
Yeah.
Because in hindsight, in retrospect, looking back at it, they were trying to marginalize us, right?
Yeah.
Keep us, if you were in a certain zip code, 93706, 93705, right? You only got a little freedom when you got into 93703, 93704, right? But it
Yeah.
seemed like those zip codes, the training, and I got to tell the truth because, I mean, when I was in high school at Fresno High, I got into it with my history professor,
Mhm.
which later admitted he was racist, but he how can I say that? He was nice. I wouldn't say nice. He was cordial with me
That's a good.
because I talked like I had some sense.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until later years in life he admitted to my sister, who ended up working with his daughter. He said, I really had some issues, and
Yeah.
God used your brother to break down some stereotypes and some barriers. He said, because I had stereotypes in my head about black kids, and he kept coming in every week challenging me. I didn't think I was doing that, right? I remember always having something to say, but I wasn't trying to be rude. But Jeff, it was like I just couldn't. He was a history teacher, and I'm
Yeah.
like, no, you're not going to sit here and tell me black people came from monkeys. I'm not
Yeah.
going for that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah.
So it was
And,
it was a tug of words, a tug of war, tug of words.
yeah, and if you weren't empowered to challenge that, then you accepted it because you
Yeah,
had to accept it.
you had to
You
accept.
had to at least retain it to pass a test, right? Like, and
Does
so
that mean complicit?
it's complicit, yeah. So it's yeah,
Whether you
but
want to listen, let me throw this at you. And we will end up with Carter G. Woodson. He's the father. He's credited as being the father of Black History Month, but it
yes,
was Mr. Broussard from Texas A&M who actually made it a month. But I want to read a quote, and you tell me what you think about this. Okay, so Carter G. Woodson says, as another has well said, to handicap a student by teaching him that his black face is a curse and that his struggle to change his condition is hopeless is the worst sort of lynching.
mhm.
Wow, that's powerful. Huh?
That is. And I think, and as graphic as something as lynching is, when someone is physically lynched, they cease to exist. Like they cease to
Mhm,
exist, basically, right? They
mhm.
But if I can get your mind, if I can lynch your mind, and if I can
Talking
rape
good.
you of any dignity or rape you of any, and let me back off from the word rape. There, I don't want to be insensitive to it because but if I can kill your,
Castrate. Yeah.
oh yeah, like if I can kill your critical thinking, if I can kill your self esteem, not only do I impact you, I impact the person that you are connected to. I
And
impact your
and the future
family
generations.
and your future generations. I impact your kids, right? This is where you had a generation of parents who didn't understand, what was happening to kids in school. Parents who didn't when some of the parents who were like, shut up and listen to your teachers, right? Shut up and do what your teachers tell you to do. These were parents who didn't understand that kids were being programmed to be tracked into a workforce, into they're basically being tracked out of their potential, right?
That's good.
Their dreams were being squashed, right? Their imaginations were being quelled. Their creativity was being squashed. Sometimes their talent was being squashed. Stop singing in my classroom. Stop,
Mhm.
stop dancing break up these, stop rapping, stop writing, and so you had all these things that were being squashed, and you had parents who, because of programming, were like, if the teacher told you, Jonathan, stop humming in class,
You better do
and
it.
you better do it, or they
Yeah.
reach out to parent, and parent will reinforce that Jonathan better quit humming in class. Who knows the damage on some potential music career or some
Yeah.
potential, right? Like, or maybe you were humming because you were trying to put that content to a rhythm so you could retain it,
Right.
and that was being squashed because it just
Listen,
didn't fit.
people, this is some good information. Dr. Hunt, let me tag on something that you just said.
Mhm.
Carter G. Woodson also made this statement in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro. If you can control a man's thinking, you
Uh,
don't have to worry about his action. When you determine what a man shall think, you don't have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you make a man feel that he's inferior, you don't have to compel him to accept an inferior status, for he himself will seek it. If you
yes.
make a man think that he is justly an outcast, you don't even have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. If there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. Wow. I mean, that
So
just supports the statement that you were just making about what who we how we think and what we think and how that shapes who we are and what we do and what we accomplish in life.
then the Bible says, "So man thinketh, so is he." Right? Like, if I can if I can program your mind, to, yeah, I can. If I can win your mind, I've won you.
Hmm.
Right? You are
Hmm.
no longer a threat if I can
Hmm.
get you thinking less of yourself.
Come on.
You're no longer a threat.
Come on.
If I, as a education system, if I as a criminal justice system, if I as a you name the system, if I can get you to think less of yourself, you are no longer a threat to overturn this system.
Wait a
Uh,
minute. Let's pause because that's heavy. Okay.
uh,
Because it's a universal principle in any system,
any,
in any system, if I can get you to think differently about yourself, I've beaten you.
I beat you because
That's
if I get you to accept, in your mind, accept the plight that I want you to accept, I've
mm,
won the game.
wow.
Because you won't fight the system because you've accepted your place in the system.
Okay, so this goes down another tributary. All right, which I want to bring in because it's important. So these fraternal organizations, such as the police, right, and other ones. If you know the origins of how these groups started,
Yeah,
the bounty hunters, all that stuff back in the day
yeah,
and we get that. That's how the police fraternity organization it started. All right, here's what's powerful with what you just said. These people who don't have the utmost of righteous intentions, unfortunately, like to infiltrate these systems
mhm,
because they know that we revere and respect them. And
mhm,
they're the ones that cause damage. You
yeah,
know, not all police officers are bad, but those who intentionally have egregious, hateful motives,
yeah,
right? Get in positions of power, right? Not all teachers are bad, but those who have hit other agendas, who get in positions of influence and want to teach in certain zip codes, not to educate and train the kids, but to actually destroy and tear down any self worth
mhm,
that these kids might have. That's unfortunately, and I know it's something that that you don't like to often probably acknowledge, because I get it, as an educator, your job is to make sure that but unfortunately, there is that element that tries to lurk around, right? That
yeah,
tries to cause so much damage until, and I think from what I've observed down through the years, unfortunately, those students who've been victims of that evil and heinous motive are the ones that get a lot of attention on the
mhm,
media.
mhm,
We don't hear about all the good kids who are really trying to do what is right, who are being focused. What we hear about is all of the deviants.
yeah. It's yeah, and it's and just I mean, and I can speak to when and people are dismissive of things like when you talk about systemic oppression and people like want to quickly dismiss
Mhm.
that, right? So when I think about schooling as a system and historical systemic racism and systemic oppression, one thing about a great system is it's people proof, right?
Mm.
So this is how you can have so you think about education and disproportionate suspensions of black and brown kids. You have had black principals, right? Oh, we need more black teachers and black principals. I am a proponent of that. But while also doing, more, we need more black police chiefs. We need more black police. I'm for all of that. But you also need people who are critically analyzing the systems in which they operate.
That's
Because
good.
you can have a black principal
You're good.
that will, like, you can have a black principal
Yeah.
who can suspend black kids with the best of them.
Well, yeah. I think about the police brutality a month
Yeah,
ago
yeah, yeah.
in Memphis, right? Black on
I
black.
believe so. Yeah. So that's where strong systems are people proof, right? If you don't have people, systems of policing, and again, I'm not a police officer. I know police officers, and to a person, every police officer I know personally is an amazing
Right.
individual, right? But when you think about systems, a system says that three police officers can stand by and watch one police officer murder somebody, and then feel obligated to, one, not intervene, and two, not and not testify against that
Yeah.
person,
Protect them.
right? That's a system.
Mm.
It's like, well, there are a few bad apples. That's a bad tree, right? A bad tree, right? So a bad system,
I like that. That's a
so
bad tree.
great systems are people proof.
Yeah.
And so what we need are people, if you're going to hire, if you're hiring black teachers, you're hiring black school leaders, that's phenomenal. But ensure that these folks, as well as the other folks in your system, are critically analyzing their systems for these biases, for these, these avenues where historical oppression has been taken out, because that's how you'll begin to gain the trust of the public. Like,
Mm.
are you courageous enough to speak out against your system, the system that you're operating in? That's where you'll start.
Oh, that's heavy
It's
because
heavy.
listen, because
It's
that
not
can
easy.
that's heavy. That's heavy, Dr. Hunt, because that can go into any area where there is a system, whether it
Mhm.
be religion.
Yeah. Oh my
uh,
gosh. Yeah.
I mean, let me throw something else at you. So Carter G. Woodson also said in the miseducation of the Black Negro that from the period of the end of the Civil War until the 1930s, Black students were underrepresented in the area in the educational system, and there was no training or learning to help them to overcome barriers. Have we improved somewhat on that, or are we still kind of lacking in that approach, or is that not a focus anymore?
We have definitely taken tremendous steps forward in it's really the terminology used in schools is really access and equity, right?
Mm,
It's really like students who have historically not had access to AP classes, not had access to dual enrollment, not had access to the arts at a high level. All of these things that lend themselves to better life outcomes. We're, really speaking for the field. We're really consciously making an effort to ensure that those paths, those advanced tracks, are begin to look more and more representative. Still got a ways to go,
mhm.
but begin to look more and more representative of the students that we're serving in these communities. Because I mean, even 10 years, I used to, before I started doing what I do now, I would coach uh, school principals and, have these conversations with them about, the programs in their schools. And so I look at their school campus demographics, and then we go look at the AP classes and we go look at the band, right? And look at the choir and look at these these auxiliaries that were predictors of better life outcomes, and they were not representative of the kids that were in the school. They were segregated, right? So you
Mhm,
had segregation within
mhm.
within diverse schools. You had segregation. Edison High School,
Yeah,
when
Fresno High. I was
when
I
I,
was
went to Edison High School, I was in the Edison Computech pathway. My classes did not look like the classes, the
in the
rest of
main
my
campus. Yeah.
Edison class. Yeah. Edison was a majority African American student population, but my classes, there were me and like three
I
other.
was the only one
Yeah, like,
in my
and
AP
so
classes. Yeah,
this is 25 however many years ago,
yeah.
and so we've taken strides forward to ensure that access and equity, ensure that we're working with our students at an early age to head off those barriers, which might have been reading, which might have been math, to head off those barriers in the K6 years,
Mhm.
K8 years, so kids in high school could get into the fine art and some of these other things.
I remember I actually my high school years to me were more vivid than my college years,
Yeah,
probably because my teachers were unconventional in the AP program at Fresno High. But
same.
one in particular, well, two. I had an English teacher named Anna Gade, and she was over the academic decathlon, right?
Mhm,
But so she was kind of nice. She was kind of nice, but frank,
mhm,
right? Then I had a teacher. Oh my God, I was trying to think of his name right now. Anyway, he was from Syracuse, New York. Now this is funny. This teacher, and his name will come to me in a minute. This teacher, Jeff, used to just like I would write papers and stuff, and he would be like, "I know you come from a Pentecostal family." And I'd be like, he would embarrass me in class, right? He said, "You're writing like your dad's preaching." And at first I was offended, right? But
Yeah,
that was my only influence. My
yeah.
father in the church, moments of blessings, our church. We have a great church. I love my church.
Pastor
Um,
Dr. Marie,
Dr.
best
Marie,
best
my
pastor
mom,
and leader
yeah,
around.
she's carrying but I remember and I mean, I would just get C's and D's and C's and D's. And to finally, I wasn't getting it. And he said, "You're writing like you're here. He said, you're writing based on your environment." So he really got me into reading. And he said, this is a setup to the next question. He said, education allows you to travel places you can't go physically,
Mhm.
right? Reading in particular does that, and research. So I was able to travel to places, right, in my reading that I couldn't go physically. With where we are, and I remember this, Viv. I remember saying to myself in the 10th grade, "I don't dream," and
Right.
that was weird to me. I don't
Yeah.
have dreams of being anybody,
Yeah.
and I was afraid to tell somebody, right? Until I realized that I was in an environment where my teachers really didn't think that I would overcome the odds of my people group. Like
Mhm.
became the token. I was not voted in, right? But I became the unspoken token for all the black men, black young males at Fresno High during that school cycle. And
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking, and I didn't know that at first, right? So, I'm trying to figure out why are they talking to me a certain way. But as I began to understand my junior and senior year, I started shifting and pivoting. And what I did, and back to what that said about my history teacher, is I stopped letting the negative stuff affect me. And I
Yeah.
put a positive spin. I said, okay, all right. So what you're actually doing is you're challenging me because you see the potential.
Yeah.
And like that paradigm shift is what shifted my love for reading and education and knowledge.
Mhm.
I just didn't want to become an educator. I didn't have I don't know, which is
Yeah.
my next question to you. What made you become an educator?
I the only thing I can think of, it was a calling. I went into I went into Fresno State as an accounting major. Like
Mm,
I did an accounting apprenticeship in high school, and I like could mess with some numbers. Like I like thought that was something I knew how to do. This whole thing of get a great job, right? Like so, accountants. Accounting, that's a great job. And so I went into Fresno State as an accounting major, and then first semester, I was like, this is not, I hadn't even taken an accounting class. And I just feel like it was just a divine tugging that was like, you know what, go and do what you're supposed to do. And so I first semester, walked right over to the education building and was like, I need to be here. Like, what do I need to do to change my major and what?
mm,
And they got me in and got my major switched, and I went on a education trajectory. And I come from a family of educators,
yeah,
aunts and uncles.
you do. You do.
Yeah, and just thinking about Miss Graves and Miss Jackson and some of those folks at Carver Elementary, who were those auntie teachers, right? Like, and the impact they had on my life. It was just a calling. Like and it was just a matter of going through the steps to qualify myself to do it and do it well.
Do you have any regrets?
I think I
That's
don't
a
know.
good question too. Be honest, because
That's
a lot of
Yeah,
times we kind of, but be honest.
yeah. No, that's a great question. I think what I think what and I don't know if I call it a regret. I
Okay.
think what I think what may have happened to me is when I talk about my elementary school age um, uh, education, and you mentioned dreaming a little while ago.
Mhm.
I don't feel like I was put in a position to think outside the box. I
That's
don't
all I'm
think
s it was a generational thing,
I
Jeff.
was, yeah, I don't think I was, put in a position to think entrepreneurial. Don't think I was put in a position to think, critically about running a business, right? Like, so I think I was programmed, and I ultimately I accepted it, right,
Yeah.
because I didn't know any better out of yet. But I think I was programmed to be a great employee, and even at 46, and some of my entrepreneurial aspirations, it's that, I mean, that programming was thick, because I still struggle with, gosh, do I want
It's
to,
some real talk, y'all.
it's, do I want to break outside of this box and do some other, right? So that programming, from ages 5 to 13 or 12, or those elementary, I mean, that stuff like really cemented in me, like, be a great, loyal, rule following employee. And so, and so when I look at, once that the light came on a few years ago, then it's just me battling my own laziness, or battling my own issues. But that programming, like, really squashed. I didn't dream like you. I
Woo,
did
this is
not
real talk.
dream. I was grounded in reality, and I was grounded in my reality, of, of poverty, which I use poverty carefully, because I had everything I needed when I needed it, right? Like,
Yeah,
um, and I didn't know what I didn't have, right?
right.
But
That was all of us.
right, yeah, like, so, but I do, I like, can recall, really early on, being programmed to, even from some influence from parents, right? Like,
Mhm.
you work hard, do what the teachers tell you, and you'll be able to get a good job, right? And that was the thing. And so I wouldn't call that a regret. I call that a byproduct of some of my early schooling. But I'm, God has been faithful. Like, and He's taken really good care of me, and allowed me to take really good care, of get my kids through college, do all these things.
Mhm.
And so He's been faithful. And so I don't regret, no. Missed opportunities, yes.
Wow. This has been such a great conversation, and I want to thank you for your transparency, because I concur. I think I'm grateful for the life that God has given me, but I think I could have done more if um if I if I knew that I had the power to give myself the permission.
Yeah,
I know that sounds crazy,
yeah,
but in the generation we grew up in, we didn't hear it. You know what I
yeah,
mean? We just didn't hear it. And it wasn't that our parents said no. It's just we didn't hear that reinforcement that you can. And I think it's because they didn't go far.
hmm,
They didn't want us to really experience failure, right?
yeah,
Because they were conditioned in their generation,
yeah,
right? That you can only go so far. You can only be a janitor. You
yeah,
can only, you know what I'm saying? And I'm not embarrassed and ashamed of my father. I mean, he was a
hey,
garbage man for the
yep,
city of Sacramento. And it's funny because when I was a kid, I used to change his job description because I didn't want the other kids to laugh at me, right? So when our friend says, "What did your dad do?" I said, "Oh, he was retired on permanent disability," but I never told them why he got retired. Like he was
yeah,
on the job as a G man
yeah,
and broke his back,
yeah,
taking care of, had an honest job, making honest wages, trying to raise a family of 11 crumb snatchers. But I remember the embarrassment of telling people my dad who used to be a garbage man. You know what I mean? So I
yeah,
I I mean I remember vividly. And I remember in my head thinking that's when I first realized that I wasn't going to let other people's opinion about me or my family decide my future.
yeah,
But what I didn't do is take the additional steps. And I remember, and then I'll let you chime in. I remember having a conversation with my father because I was mad. after high school, before going to Fresno City and Pacific, I wanted to study abroad. So I got approved to go to Spain, right? At last minute, the papers, I was going through the Rotary Club. Last minute, the papers got messed up. And so there was a family in Venezuela that was willing to take me. And my dad was like, no, you're not going to Venezuela. No, absolutely not. And so I did research on it. And I'm like, Dad, I'm going to the Rotary Club. It's safe. And he was like, flat out no. And
Yeah.
my family knows this, but the church doesn't. So I was mad at my dad for a whole year. For a
Mm.
whole year, he let me walk around thinking that I had a chip on my shoulder, right? And I did. I was mad. So he would talk to me, and I would give him one answer. And you know how my father was. He's a disciplinarian. So
Yeah.
I would say enough so I wouldn't get beat, but I wasn't trying to talk to him. Like, and I remember like a few years later, got grown, went to school. He said to me, because I was mad. He said to me, why didn't you tell me that you really wanted to do it? I said,
Wow.
because you told me you couldn't afford it. He said, we would have found a way. Now
Wow.
that
Yeah.
messed me up. The only problem is it was too late.
Yeah.
I was like, I wish you would have told me that when I was in high school, when I
Yeah.
was trying to go. You're gonna wait 5-6 years later and tell me you know. But
Yeah.
I did. I had that resentment, and my mom laughs at it now because she said, we let you think you was mad, but because we knew it hurt you and we didn't want to, injure it even more. She said, but had you really told us that this is what you really, but this goes back to what you said. We were raised to be complicit.
Yeah.
We were raised, you be quiet, don't
Yeah.
think outside the box. So yes,
Yeah.
I'm with you. I know the damage it did. And now at 50, I'm trying to start a business. Well, no, I
Yeah.
started a business, but I'm trying to make it successful. Y'all help me make it successful. But to your point,
Yeah.
had we had the support, but listen, because I don't want to take up our time. We're doing good. A few more minutes. I want to pick your brain, and I'm going to give you the floor to share what's on your heart. Okay. So I asked you about, I want to make sure because these are things that, okay, what made you an educator? You told me it was a calling.
Mhm.
Okay, 2 questions and I'm done. Then you can have the final word. What is your greatest concern as an educator? And then 2, is there talk and discussion for artificial intelligence? Is the is the educational system ready to embrace what's coming now? Not next, but
Yeah.
what's coming now?
I and I'll answer them both together as I was thinking about concerns. The one, so and there are several, right? So one concern is, and I'll speak to it in a productive sense, right? Like so, one, while preparing kids to do, we need to prepare kids to think and create. So
That's good.
if I'm, while preparing kids to, I think about, because CTE is a big thing, career technical ed, right? Like, so
Mhm.
while preparing kids for careers, we can't track kids, um, into these career paths and ignore reading deeply, critical thinking, math deeply, right? Like, don't box a kid in. If you're teaching this kid welding, right? Don't box that kid into the skill of
Come
welding.
on. Come
Uh,
on.
Give them the tools to think, create, think critically. Gosh, how do I take my welding skill and leverage it into a business, right? And leverage it into because that's how generational wealth is built,
Come
right?
on. Come
Generational
on.
wealth is not built by limiting my education to a skill. It's like give me the skill. That's great, but also teach me how to do. But also teach me how to think and create. So so one that was one concern, right? Where we track kids into these things where we teach them how to do. The other thing, is This will kind of transition a little bit into what your second question. A big concern I have is are we as schools preparing kids for the future economy? So 5 years ago, right? Did we? I'll use my son as an example, right? He went to Fresno, graduated at Central High School, went to Fresno State, got a degree in English, but he was doing a internship um, for TikTok where he was doing something connecting. I can't even describe it. Like he's connecting music tracks to TikTok and trying to get these tracks to be trending and whatnot. And I'm like, what aspect of his education prepared him for that?
Mm-hmm.
And so are we infusing creativity? Are we infusing critical thinking? Are we infusing reading deeply, math deeply, programming, these things, so that our kids are ready for jobs that don't exist? Like like this economy, and kind of segueing into AI and segueing into this economy. I can't tell you what the jobs are going to be
Right.
5 years from now,
Right.
but what it looks like is happening is it looks like I was just at a conference this past week, and it just blew my mind. I'm like, because I was kind of sleeping on it. It blew my mind, but a whole bunch of robots, right? Like, and this, like, literally at the conference, there were booths, like a whole bunch of robots.
They're here.
They're here, right? Like a whole lot of conversations. And so what I gathered from that is that I'm like, wow. So for capitalism to work, you can't replace humans as consumers, but you can sure replace them as producers, right? So as long as you have humans as consumers, capitalism will work. So
Right.
so how do you equip kids to think, to create, so that they don't become irrelevant as producers? Because that's what AI is trying to do.
Yeah.
AI eliminates customer service representatives,
Right.
because you can be chatting with, I have a problem with my cell phone at Verizon, and I'm doing the chat trying to get help, and I'm not chatting with a human. I'm chatting with a computer that has, like, who's interacted with enough language that they can have a conversation with me, and I don't know the difference, right?
Right.
So how do I prepare kids in my schools to not be irrelevant as a producer in the future economy? Um,
Wow. No,
and that's a concern that I
yeah,
have.
that
Because if our impact is limited to producing, then we're, and not even, notwithstanding race, we're slaves all over again.
yeah,
If
yeah. All of us.
all of us, right? If our impact is limited to being a consumer, then yeah, we're slaves.
Wow.
Yeah.
Listen, that was some great information, y'all. Let me do a station identification check. You're listening to a live interview for Black History Month with our very special guest, Dr. Jeffrey Hunt, on Believe Radio Fresno. Listen, if you are loving this conversation and you want to see more, I'm trying to get him to get a show, y'all, on the on the station. Please email us. The email is on your screen there, and the website, of course, is at the bottom rotation there ticking. We would love to hear from you. Reach out to us and uh, enjoy the 24-hour gospel inspirational music station. 24 hours a day, music is playing to uplift your spirit and your soul. And we thank you in advance for your prayers, love, and support of this endeavor. Dr. Hunt, again, it's been a pleasure and a blessing. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to kind of speak and share with our audience what's on your heart, however the Lord leads you. Again, thank you for coming on and being a guest of our station. And again, we bid you God's blessings and look forward to working with you in future partnerships. Everybody, here it is, Dr. Jeffrey Hunt.
So yeah, Prophet Jonathan, thank you for your time, and thank you, Believe Radio Fresno, for having me. And this has been a lot of fun. Thinking about trends in education, thinking about life in general, thinking about being a 46-year-old Black man, right? Like, and so I just thank you for your time, and I just for those who work in education, just I just a few nuggets, like, and those, and not even limited to education, those who work in the faith communities. If you're impacting kids in general, whatever capacity that is, just really leverage partnerships, right? Leverage Believe Radio Fresno, like leverage this vehicle, leverage the elderly folks in your, connect with the elderly folks in your communities. Connect, if you work in schools, connect with the churches in your communities. Because we're in this together, right? And no, there's no benefit to existing in a silo. And so I just encourage you, again, keep fighting the good faith. My former boss, lived by this idea of be kind, and work hard, and that's my message going away today. Be kind, work hard, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And so I'm signing off. Thank you, Prophet Jonathan. Thank you, Believe Radio Fresno. God bless you all. Have a great evening.
And there you've had it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again. Share this on all of your platforms, on the replay. And again, Dr. Hunt, we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to share with us. And I think that the future is bright if there are more educators like you who are going to be at the helm, because we are now that age, right? It was funny because when we were younger, I don't know if we knew we would become the people we looked up to, right? But you are that emblem, that symbol of inspiration, and may God grant you the grace and the wisdom to keep making a difference in the lives of our young people. We're signing off. Have a great night. Grace and peace to all of you. Multiplied blessings.
God bless you all.